Well, I just thought I would come on and just talk about a couple things. As far as stuff that's been happening and stuff I'm seeing, and it really looks pretty uncanny. I mean, it's like it's eerily similar to the scenario that I had created for the documentary. Um, I didn't really expect anybody to come to this live, so if people come, that's cool. If not, no big deal. I was just here to talk about the situation that's developing down there in Mexico and how it relates very much to the documentary I had created. It looks very similar to that. Um, as far as what I had actually put in that documentary with the La Raza narco state and how they came to be a faction. All of that that's occurring down there looks very much like what I had put in the storyline. And then you got the 260,000, 260,000 that they're going to axe. That looks like the beginnings of, the Free American Army. Like I've said before, it all is lining up nearly exactly identical to what I had put in that documentary. I mean, it's almost frighteningly similar, as far as that goes. I couldn't. It's just it freaks me out a little bit. It really does. It's like, wow, man, I really called that. I really called that. Hey, now my friend Ken, he had shared that video as far as the guy talking about what's going on down there and showing the hey Miriam and Speckled Bird, welcome. I'm glad you all are here. Yeah, just doing a late night stream. I really didn't have anything planned. I was just gonna sort of just talk to the audience if anybody's in there. Just talk about different subjects, as far as the happenings. Um, as far as things in my personal life, it's sort of like yeah, there's a lot of strange occurrences. I'll just put it that way, going on, and it just feels like sometimes that I'm just floating on. As far as yeah, Porky, yeah, he's a good cat. He's a great cat. He was the one that was having issues eating dry food that I had to get back on the dry food. He's still eating mixed dry and wet cat food, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Um, but yeah, it just feels sometimes like I'm just floating on, in this through this world. It's just me, really. It just feels like it's just me. I mean, really and truly, it is just me. It's just me and my three cats. We're just sort of cruising through the world, and everything is continuing to fall apart. And yet, I'm still here. I'm still continuing, floating on, through all the madness, through all this. And I'm doing my best to warn people, but, not everybody, you know, not everybody likes me. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm just going to put it that way. I'm just some asshole, Iraq war veteran that, apparently, is crazy to some people, but, it's whatever. People can, take it or leave it. I really, really don't care. I'm just trying to help people because I know exactly what's coming here. I know exactly what's coming here. Maybe my methods might appear crude to some people, but, I'm not here to entertain people. I'm here to show people, convey information to people exactly how it's going to be, raw and uncut. It's basically, low budget history channel. If you want documentaries, hey, I got documentaries here. if you want stories, I got those too. Speaking of, I just did the part 9 for the audiobook just a little earlier tonight. I hope people have listened to the audiobook. It is in the playlist. There is an audiobook playlist where you can just listen to all of them the whole way through if you want to. It's the Chinese Russian invasion audiobook playlist. Now that's up there in the playlist section. Um, but yeah, there's that. And with all the stuff that's been happening down there in Mexico, it's concerning because, again, because it lines up so well with everything that was made insofar as that scenario is concerned. It really, I don't know. It's so much like what I had created as far as the documentary is concerned that it just really it's astounding to me. It's astounding that all these things are starting to come to pass. I'm looking for certain artwork right now because I was actually going to describe some of it as far as what it entails and represents and why. As far as the work that was created is concerned, I can't find anything right now. But I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Again, I just was going to just basically talk about these different situations, and relate it to what work I've already done, and yeah, nothing really organized tonight. Some people might find this boring, but hey, it's whatever, it's whatever. Trying to find these maps. I get my stuff, mixed up all the time. I gotta put it in some sort of an order so it'll be easier to find. But yeah, this is just me talking, just regular old Chad here. I'm not really doing anything special, just... Yeah, so what you had with, the stuff that's going on down in Mexico, they're saying is happening up here in Baja California, the part of Mexico that sort of juts down here. They're saying they're having a lot of problems up in this area, right about here, right just south of California, Arizona. Well, in the story, what occurred was the situation in Mexico broke down, right? Like it is right now, like it is exactly like right now. It had broken down, and you had these narco militants from the drug war. They went up into New Mexico in the scenario. But then you had the Mormon state gaining traction, and they started to expand and take land in a little sliver of Arizona, but also in New Mexico. And they ended up bumping into the La Raza narco state militants, who ended up, having quite a lot of battles with them. They had two really big ones. They had the one in Santa Fe, and then they had the other one right here at Albuquerque. And of course, there were spillovers in Mexico, like there are in many internal conflicts, where it spills over into neighboring nations. Because what occurred was you had these guys and these guys, because they had foreign volunteers coming in to help them. They ended up fighting one another on the way to their respective destinations. The narco militants fought the volunteers going to the Mormon state. Because remember, Mexico has a pretty big Mormon population, evidently. Because I had looked into that, and it's true. Mexico has quite a big Mormon population, as does Brazil and Philippines. Those are the top three foreign Mormon nations. I mean, as far as like the populations of Mormons that live in these nations, so those are the top three. And then, being that they were going to the Mormon state, and you had the narco militants going to the La Raza narco state. Because remember, there was a big power vacuum here. There was a huge power vacuum. You had the weak central regime breaking down, basically. They had broken down, and they lost their power because the Free American Army had launched a coup, but their coup failed, so the coup forces fled south. Here in Virginia, they had fled south because the regime barely held on to power. They had a counter coup, and their counter coup was successful. But as a result, you had different installations that changed loyalties to the Free American Army faction. And then you had some here, you had them predominantly right here, but you also had a good chunk of them right here too. And this is where a lot of their oil resources came from. They came from Oklahoma, they came from parts of Arkansas and Louisiana here. And they had to battle for Fort Polk and Barksdale Air Force Base and so on. But you also had them out here out west too, because they had the big battle over Las Vegas between and the Hoover Dam between the regime, the Free American Army, even the Mormon state had units that went down to fight there, and the Union of Southwest Militias. So it was like a four-way battle royale to capture Las Vegas and the Hoover Dam, because they wanted the Hoover Dam intact. All the different sides wanted the dam intact because they wanted to reroute power to their areas. Because if you remember, in the internal conflict, what had occurred here in the Mormon state was they had to rely on coal-burning power plants, but because they had so little fuel, they had to rely on animal transport to bring the coal to the coal-burning power plants. And they had to rotate power like in a third world nation, like in Iraq. When I was in Iraq, they rotated power quite a lot. You would see one village lit up at night, and then the power would disappear, and it would turn on in another village. You would see it at night, and one village would completely go out like a light switch, and another would just flip on. So then, you had that going on. So they had to rotate power a lot like that. So what they wanted was the dam intact too, so that they could reroute all the power it generates, because that dam actually generates quite a lot of electricity. But they wanted to reroute it here back to the Mormon state territory. So they all fought over that dam. That was a big battle between 4 different factions. So all the stuff that's developing in real life is stuff that parallels what I had created. I mean, eerily similar. I mean, it is. It's shocking. And all the stuff you see going on with the left-right paradigm. Well, this faction here morphed into something different. They started out as like what I guess you could call conservatives, and then they morphed into something really crazy and, radical. And then same with these guys, but they stayed as traditionalists. They had turned into just traditionalist conservatives, and these guys are more like libertarian, all pro local rule, and I guess you could say the same for these guys. There were 4 moderate factions. Well, actually, more like 6 moderate factions, because you could include Florida and Texas, who both left. They both left, but they were pretty tame as far as how extreme the factions were. They were pretty tame factions, all things considered. But them, the regime, and of course, La Raza narco state here were all pretty radical factions. They were the foremost radical. The Free American Army was pretty tame. So was Texas and Florida and Maine militia and Northwest Conservative Army and the Union of Southwest Militias. So you had all these different factions arising, and the reason I'm making this stream is because there are so many parallels with real life. So again, the stuff going on in Mexico right now could easily turn into the same types of things on this map. Like you could have them spilling over into the country, because oh man, shit. Okay, it died on me. My phone died. I had to plug it back in. I'm sorry about all that. But anyways, back to what I was saying. This was pretty important as far as understanding how the current situation relates to what's happening right now in our world. Okay, so here's what I was saying. I was going back to explaining all of this, how it all basically broke down. Now, you had the situation in Mexico, and it spilled over into America. Like in the first part of the documentary, in the very first video, when you listen to the part about the origins of the La Raza narco state was all the pandemonium in Mexico. They had an internal, like, a drug war going on in Mexico, which caused them to come into the United States because they were taking advantage of all the turmoil, because the Free American Army had their failed coup, and you had this NSRF faction. The NSRF rose up and had their own coup, and they took over a large portion of the central Midwest, even expanding as far west as Wyoming and parts of Montana here. And then they really, though, had their best run when it came to expanding, to the southeast and also to the east, which, because they were on their mad dash to race and take the psychological center of power, because they wanted to be known as the ruling faction. Just like the Free American Army, they both were in a race to seize the cap, but they never made it. Although the NSRF got close, they went as far northeast as Lynchburg, Virginia, which would have been right about here, right above my finger, right there. They made it right there. But that was as far as they got, and then you had the Free American Army after they got nerve gassed by the NSRF, because the NSRF was using things like these nerve agent shells for their artillery. They had quite a bit of VX and sarin shells. These are VX shells here. Here's one with the fuse on it, where they screw on the fuse. They come with these nose plugs that are like yellow nose plugs. They cover the part where you put the fuse on. You unscrew the nose plug, then you screw on the fuse with the fuse setter wrenches, and then it's ready to go, basically. So what they did after the NSRF used their nerve gas, it scattered the Free American Army in the Battle of Martinsville, Virginia, causing them to flee to the east here, or actually more like southeast, I should say. Well, they fled east a little bit and then southeast after that nerve gassing, because Martinsville is right where it all comes together, like right there. Hold on. Yeah, there. Man, it's hard to do this, y'all. I'm sorry. I got a piece of garbage phone right here, right where my fingernail is. That's where they all come together. And that was where the Battle of Martinsville was fought. Before the NSRF started to head to the northeast into the regime territory. But that they also won the Battle of Chicago. Now, the Free American Army faction that held this area right there, they weren't really involved in that battle, but the NSRF managed to knock the regime out of Chicago and capture the whole city. But of course, they continued low-intensity type of warfare against the Free American Army there. They also captured a lot of these bases and silos up here, too, during the internal conflict. But back to the way that it began was, the left-right paradigm collapsed. It totally collapsed during the situation as the food, fuel, economy, and currency collapse occurred. So too went the left-right paradigm. You had that totally collapse. So that's what caused the army to fracture into all those different pieces, because you had Florida basically getting their guard forces, and they got their reserves. The reservists and guardsmen, plus the local armed militias, all became the Florida Armed Forces. Then you had their allies, the Army of the Southeast. Now, their story was because the whole economy of that region was failing because it was highly dependent upon tourism. Because tourists would go there to spend a lot of money. There was a lot of vacation areas, but the economy broke down. Nobody was going there. Nobody was spending money. So that sparked basically the whole mindset of like Southern secessionist type of things among those types of people there. So they did that and they became their own faction. Now, imagine in real life if something like that were to occur. It's very, very easy for something like that to occur. People might not realize that, but it really, really is. So, you had one faction conducting the coup, which was the Free American Army, who was discontented with all the mandates and everything. I even put that in the origin story. I put all of that in there. Well, look what we have today. We have those 260,000 that they're threatening to get rid of. Basically, 8 entire core-sized elements worth of troops. You know, and now look what they're doing. They're likely about to do another thing that I put in the documentary. They're likely about to merge all of the paramilitary forces into one single entity. They're likely to do that. That'll most likely happen as well. And that was also in the documentary. I do believe that we're really going to see stuff like that occur. So then, you had Texas, of course, leaving too. They got a lot of their guard forces. They got a lot of their reservists. They even got some of the active duty to join them from the Hood battle that occurred, and also they took Fort Sam Houston without a fight, which is like a big medical facility. Mostly, I mean, it's like it has one of the best burn centers in the entire country, where they used to treat burn victims from the Army or any other branch that was sent there to Fort Sam in San Antonio. Well, they took it without a fight, and they basically, the only real major campaign they had to fight was the battle over Fort Hood, but they still had to maintain a military presence in West Texas because, remember, they had a fragile peace with La Raza narco state. They made a deal with them that as long as the La Raza narco state didn't attack Texas, Texas wouldn't attack them. And that also helped a little bit to keep the Mormon state off of Texas's back, at least until they got to the panhandle of Texas. So that type of stuff is extremely realistic in that, those sorts of things can easily occur. You can have states leaving. You absolutely can. You can have a faction like the Free American Army come into being, and there's no telling what other factions are lurking in the shadows, who have their own agendas, their own plans, their own everything. There's no telling. But you had these factions out west, like you had the Union of Southwest Militias and the Northwestern Conservative Army. They had made an alliance. Even though they had minor differences in how they were governed, as far as like how the factions did things. The Union of Southwest Militias was more about localizing their rule. They wanted to have like a confederation of communities, and they were more libertarian in how they did things. But then you had the Northwest Conservative Army, who were traditionalists. They were conservatives. They were more of what you would have called in the past Republicans, but that's what they were all about before the paradigm shift, before the paradigm collapsed. Same with Texas, really, and Florida. They all and the Army of the Southeast. But even though they made an alliance, these two, they had minor differences. The Union of Southwest Militias ideologically was more akin to, say, like, the main militia, as far as the ideological differences that they had. So, all of these are ingredients in a Syrian-style internal conflict. So, basically, hey, Brittany, great to see you. So basically, all of these things are ingredients in an internal conflict, a Syrian-style internal conflict. And you notice how fast things deteriorated. There was a power vacuum. The reason why there was a power vacuum is because when your military splits, thank you, Brittany, when your military splits into so many different pieces and fractures, that leaves open a lot of territory to be able to go its own way. It would absolutely do that in such a situation where you would have all these different factions just popping out of the woodwork, creating a new paradigm. There would be a paradigm shift, and everything would change at a moment's notice. So, oh, and back to real quick, back to my part 9 story. That takes place right here because the Ontario funnel comes down here and connects to Detroit, and it also connects to New York here, like right there by Buffalo. So, that's when the Chi-Coms were coming through there, and they were also going through there to fan out, and then they were going down there to fan out and connect with the forces coming up from Mexico. That was how they invaded in the invasion scenario. But back to the internal conflict thing. In a nation like that, of course, every madman, every faction would be trying to get their hands on the WMDs, like the chemical weapons right here, or the nukes, like the Mormon state. They had a lot of technical experts all under one roof. They had the Thule Army Depot, which is like right here. It's not that far from Salt Lake City, actually. It's out there kind of in the desert. When they got the Thule Army Depot, they hit the jackpot. When it came to munitions and ordnances, and they also had all of these experts all under one roof. You had basically all your mechanical engineers, you had electrical engineers, you had ordnance specialists of every stripe. You had basically, I said electrical engineers, and you had robotics experts too, because you have people here that fix the EOD robots, so they would understand a lot about the engineering aspect and wiring, and they would understand mechanics. They were all under one roof, because that was an Army depot where they specialized in robotics and ordnance handling, whether it was testing, whether it was maintenance, or whether it was storage, or what have you. And they had a lot of ordinances there. So when the Mormon state got a hold of that, they hit the jackpot. That was why they were able to do some really wild things with it, like their certain trucks and everything else. And that was why they were able to rig up a warhead that they got from the battle. There was a huge battle right here between them. At the very beginning of the war, there was a battle between the Mormon state and the NSRF, and it was the bloodiest battle in the entire internal conflict, because over 200,000 died. It was about close to 100,000 on each side. They maintained a stable force of some 30,000 on each side, but the reason so many died is because they had to keep bringing in reinforcements to keep their numbers stable at the front. To be able to maintain 30,000 under intense combat, they had to keep bringing in more and more and more people to reinforce the units so that they all wouldn't, fall back. Because if you lose whole battalions worth of troops, you have to replace them. You got to send in new troops and, fresh troops to plug up any gaps in the lines. And that was why so many perished in that battle. It was the biggest battle in the entire conflict, because it was easy for NSRF to bring in their forces because they had a railhead at Warren Air Force Base, as well as them having the railhead in the city of Cheyenne itself. They were able to send troops from Lincoln and the Dakotas all the way down there to the battle, direct to it, by train, because at the very beginning they had just enough fuel for the trains to be able to use it for logistical purposes. They sent the warheads out back to Lincoln, and they sent troops in with the trains, and they also did it by truck on highway. Now, they had a little bit of a hard time with their logistics, but they still managed to make it work because they had I-25. So they used what fuel they had to send in troops through I-25, but they ended up having to leave. They had to leave a lot of them after the battle. So they maintained a defensive line right after the battle. Even though the NSRF and the Mormon state made a truce, they had an uneasy truce after the battle. They both agreed to settle the score later with each other. So they had to maintain a large force here, and they sort of did the same. But they sent some of the forces, though, south to fight the battle here around Carson and everywhere else that they surrounded. And they even sent a little bit down here to fight La Raza. But that was the type of stuff that happened at the very beginning of it. And of course, when the NSRF took the chemical weapons from the Bluegrass Depot in Kentucky, they were able to send it by train to Virginia and also send it by train to Indiana for their Chicago battle. And they were, it was very difficult for them to send it south. So most of the chemical weapons stayed in the Northeast and in the Midwest. Some of them, a small amount, made it west, but because they were anticipating a future battle with the Mormon state. They were going to have one final apocalyptic battle, but it never came to be, because what happens in a conflict like that is that all the sides wear themselves out. They wear themselves out when it comes to the manpower. They wear themselves out with the logistics. It was like a total war of attrition. Attrition means losses. How much loss can you incur versus how much loss you can dish out? I mean, it was a war of attrition. It was all about losses. Can you sustain losses or can you not sustain losses? So they threw everything they had at each other, and it was a war of annihilation and attrition. But it eventually bogged down into the last big battle of the war was the one right here in Northern California and in Western Oregon, when both these two allies, when you had the Union of Southwest Militias and the Northwest Conservative Army, they teamed up and went into the woke fortress areas of the regime, and they were trying to capture I-5, because they felt if they captured I-5, they could split the regime to where, if they since they made it in a little ways, if they were to capture I-5, they would cut off the regime's ability to reinforce or supply the North or the South. They would be cut in half. So that was what the final battle was all about in the last part of that documentary. That was the final major campaign that was fought in the internal conflict. But back to the original point. Everything that's going on right now in real life, has an uncanny, eerie parallel to what I had made in that scenario. So I guess I'm not that crazy after all. I guess I'm not, because I called a lot of this before it even happened. This is probably going to turn into something very much like I made in this scenario. It really will. All the prerequisites are there, like meaning all the ingredients for such a situation exist. You got all of that going on. You have everything for the foreign Mexican narco militants. You have everything for, radical, religious cult types. You have everything for, ultranationalists or secular humanist types. You have everything for, a splitting military, and everything for, secessionist type of stuff. You have it all right there. It's all happening in real time. It's really uncanny. It's crazy to see it. It's really crazy to see it. I felt like I really had to come on and make comparisons between what's going on in real life versus, what's going on in these situations, because there are so many parallels. I'm really, really impressed that I was able to call a lot of that before it even came to be. It really is. It's really impressive. Because I put a lot of thought into making this. I put a lot of thought into it because I thought, hey, this nation is enormously vast. This is a vast nation. It's enormous. It's huge. If you look at what occurred in Syria, that can teach you a lot of lessons about such a situation, because Syria has the fourth biggest chemical weapons stockpile in the world, So they were worried about these different factions getting a hold of the chemical weapons in Syria, and that was a real danger. That was a real and present danger. So imagine now, in a nation this vast, you only have 2.2 million armed forces, and some of those are abroad. They're not even here. You got some of them abroad. Yeah, here's Romero. Say hi, Romero. Yeah. Anyway, you got some of them abroad, so they're not here. They're not even here. So let's say you got 300,000 abroad, and then you're down to what is it, 1.9. You're down to 1.9 million in the country. Not even all of those are ground troops. You still got Air Force, you got Navy, you got Coast Guard. So let's think about that for a minute. If you broke down 1.9 million per square mile, you would have one man every square mile. You would only really fill up like this much of the country, with one man per square mile. That's enormously tiny. That's enormously tiny. Do you understand? Can you fathom that? Because this nation's almost 4 million square miles. If you broke down 1.9 million men, you would have one man per square mile, and you would have all of this not filled with anybody. So what does that mean? That means that you have a gigantic power vacuum. You have a huge power vacuum where these different factions can rise up. And then if your military fractures and goes off to join different factions, then you got a real situation on your hands where everything is just totally fallen apart. It's all fallen apart. So if you have the regime threatening to kick out 260,000 troops, that's a setup. That's like a setup for these exact types of things to occur. If you have, generals and other officers that take issue with the goings on, which, you have a lot of them that do. I'm not sure if you all remember back in January of 2021, where they had their, Inog Day. I'll just call it Inog. They all turned their backs when the puppet drove by. They all turned their backs on the puppet. These were guardsmen. They turned their backs on the puppet as he drove by. And what happened was they didn't even give him a 21 gun salute. They were supposed to fire the PAC-75 artillery pieces. They're called PAC-75s. They're like ceremonial artillery pieces that shoot blanks. They shoot blanks for the 21 gun salute. I've had to do that when I was in the Army. Back when I was in the Army, when we had ceremonies, being that we were artillery, we were the ones that they picked for ceremonies to do the 21 gun salutes in the ceremonies. You got like you do it like you got to be really, really sharp when you do it. You got a loader, and you got the guy with the lanyard, or the guy that grabs a handle. It's not a lanyard on a PAC-75. It's a handle. You pull the handle, boom, it shoots. But you got to look really crisp and sharp at these ceremonies in the Army. But they didn't give him his 21 gun salute. Now these were guardsmen. These were largely guardsmen. Now if you have a bunch of disgruntled guardsmen and they take issue with what's going on, sort of like General Mathis. General Mathis was the leader of the junta. They had a junta, which was like a group of officers that planned the coup in the hypothetical. So you had the junta, which was the leadership of the Free American Army, and they were disgruntled. They were fully disgruntled with the way things were going in our country. They were angry at the economic, financial, and civil situation. They wanted to put the United States under constitutional rule. That was their whole objective as the Free American Army. That was their entire objective. So they launched their coup. It failed. Then they had to break free, and they started taking territory because certain installations and groups of guardsmen and reservists, they became what was the Free American Army. They defected and created their own faction in the hypothetical. Now, what's occurring in real life is very easily a setup for such a thing to occur. It's not hard at all to see how these things could happen, just how fast everything can fall apart. And power vacuums can be created because, for one thing, you don't have a huge force big enough to occupy the place. Every time people talk about martial law, I just laugh. I'm like, okay, tell me how. Tell me how they would do that. You tell me how they would do that. How are they going to do that? How are they going to do it? They don't have the logistics. They really don't. Their strategic reserve is almost empty. It's almost empty. It's almost empty. How are they going to launch major operations when they're almost empty? You remember when I did my hypothetical, all these factions took a piece of what was available as far as resources. Some got really blessed when it came to oil, some did not. Some didn't have much fuel at all. So they had to use, everything from like animal transport or things that really didn't use a lot of fuel consumption to be able to launch whatever operations that they launched during their campaigns. Some of them mostly conducted low-intensity warfare, like these main militia forces up there. They just basically held a line. They mostly just held their line, and it was just like a back and forth, tit for tat sort of engagement between them and the regime up there. But yeah, you would have things like that. So they had to manage their resources well. And you had allies like Texas taking the reserve fleet, which had a bunch of oil tankers and cargo ships. They took the reserve fleet at Beaumont, and that's a real thing. You can look it up. And they used it to ship oil to their ally Florida. And Florida, being that they had a lot of air bases, they had a lot of like air munitions, they might send them back weapons with their oranges and peanuts and whatever else they grow. Because remember, transporting food in Florida that was produced would be very easy. Florida's not a big chunk of land. They're close to the sea. So for them to send back food would be relatively easy because they don't have to transport it very far from the farms to the ports. You see how much I think about this stuff. You see how much I think and put a lot of thought into how I make these. You have to think about all the factors that would be in play, and then you send it back. They get their air munitions, like if they needed like a few 500 pounders or whatever to drop from their F-16s. Florida would send it to them, and they would send oil back. That was how things happened. You would really have things like that in such a situation because you might have different factions aligning themselves with one another for trading and also even for, coordinating operations. Like you had the Army of the Southeast helping Florida with their Jacksonville campaign. Now you have to remember, Jacksonville was under regime control at the very beginning of the internal conflict. So they had to take Jacksonville back because it's Florida's biggest city, and the ruler of Florida, when they seceded, the governor, or their interim leader, they wanted it back because it's Florida's biggest city. So they vowed to take it back, and they coordinated a campaign with their allies, the Army of the Southeast. But the Army of the Southeast was also trying to take Savannah and Macon because they wanted to, get the regime out of their area because the regime had pushed from Savannah all the way to Macon. They wanted to capture the strategic crossroads so that they could push into Atlanta and take Atlanta. That was the regime's goal because they had the 3rd Infantry Division right here in Savannah at Fort Stewart. And they also had the air base. They had Warner Robins Air Base, which was like right here in the southern part of their lines, right there in that southern corner. That's Warner Robins, and then there's Macon right there. So there was like a 3-way battle in the Macon battle. So the regime forces came as reinforcements from Fort Stewart to reinforce the forces at Warner Robins that were already there, and their whatever they had in Macon as far as like woke militias and things like that. So they had to reinforce them with actual army units because they wanted to capture the crossroads so that they could go all the way to Atlanta. But that failed. It failed miserably. And the Army of the Southeast held on to much of Macon. And then you had the Free American Army. They tried to take Macon, but even though they had some tactical victories in Macon in the battle there, they didn't ever take the crossroads completely. That was still held by the Army of the Southeast by the end of that campaign. So what it did for the Army of the Southeast was it bogged down the regime, and it bogged down the Free American Army in the area. Their forces in the area were bogged down. So what it did was it gave them time to build up to try to take Fort Stewart, which they never ended up doing, but they were trying to. It gave them the chance. But, you have all these dynamics in play. Like you have to think about what the power situation would be like with electricity. Like I showed you with the Mormon state, they had to rotate power because they had to use animal labor. They had to hook up wagons of coal, take it to their coal burning plants from their coal producing regions right here in the north. They had to take it to the coal burning plants, and they had to rotate power to make it even all work. You would have things like that. You have to think about stuff like that. And then when the fuel gets low, then everybody's exhausted too from all the fighting. You lost a lot of really good people in that fighting. You lost a lot of resources because you have to spend what few resources you have. You have to budget things because you can't just launch campaigns willy-nilly. You have to have the ability to even do it in the first place. Not only do you have to have the personnel, you also have to have transportation. You have to have not only transportation for the personnel, but you got to have transportation for the logistics. You have to maintain your transportation with spare parts, POL products, which are your petroleum and lubricants and everything else. You have to have all of that. You also have to have food. You have to have immense amounts of food. You have to have immense amounts of water, because you got to understand, when you're concentrating large forces, you have to feed all of them. You got to feed them all. You got to feed and you got to water them. You got to make sure they have transport, and you have to make sure that they have medical attention, for the wounded and, people that'll handle the dead. You got to have all of that. You can't just launch an operation when you're not prepared. You have to have ammunition at the ready. You got to have it on tap. You have to have depots, like forward depots where you deposit your ammunition, your POL products, your fuel, logistical centers, in other words. So you have to have all of that. You can't just launch an operation when you're not ready. So when people say crazy shit like martial law, it's like, okay, how are you going to do that? How are you going to project power when you lack the fuel to do it? Like, do you know how many people live in this country and how many people are, well endowed, well equipped? Well equipped, I'll just say. Do people understand that? 'Cause that is an endowment. You have your equipment and you're all set up. You're tough, you're rough, you're ready to go. You're ready to defend yourself. I'll just say you're ready to protect yourself from any kind of evildoers or any sorts of people with bad intentions. You're ready to protect yourself from that. At a moment's notice, if anyone attacks you or your community. So you also had like these neutral areas too, which were basically what I was just saying. You would have people there that were at the ready to defend their communities against any faction that would try to attack them, whether it was the NSRF or whether it was the Free American Army or the regime or whoever. You would have people that were protecting their communities, but they didn't take any sides in the conflict. That would be a thing too. That would be a very real thing. You would have all of that going on. That's all the types of things that occur in such a situation. I'm just giving examples. And you had splits, like you had a split right here where you had the NSRF here and you also had the NSRF up here. But the ones up here weren't that well equipped. These were essentially just militias, and they tried and tried to take Detroit, but they just couldn't take it from the regime because it was like an even battle right here. Both sides were relatively the same as far as like their abilities, capabilities, equipment, things like that, because it was just regular militia versus militia when it came to right here. But here, they built up for a huge campaign, and they launched it, and they went up and took the whole area. So, that's the type of things. You can't just willy-nilly have like martial law. Like, that doesn't work like that. It never works like that. You have to have everything all set up. You got to have logistical supply points. You have to have the logistics to do it. When I was in Iraq, again, I'll talk about it again. When I was in Iraq, when we launched our big Operation Saber Tempest, we had a 5-month-long operation. And we used thousands of tons. We used thousands of tons worth of logistics, that was everything. Our food, our water, all of our supplies, our ammo, our artillery shells, everything. It was immense. It was a humongous buildup of logistics. We had to have everything, and it had to be at places where we could get to it relatively quick. Like, we operated out of a FOB, our forward operating base, and we had combat outposts that we would hold down. Combat outposts. What we would do is we would do village hopping. We would capture one town, then give it to the Iraqi army or the Iraqi police, which were our puppet regime forces that we raised up to, to be puppet forces. Well, we would take a town, we'd give it to the Iraqi army or the Iraqi police, and we would hop to another village, capture that village, give it to the Iraqi army, Iraqi police. Sometimes they would lose control because they would get attacked and they would drop everything and run unless we were there to back them up. So we would have to go back, recapture the town, and give it to them again. So I went to Combat Outpost or COP. I went to the COP called COP Bama, which was the first one. Then I went to Imam Mansour, which was another COP, another combat outpost. Then I went to Turkey Patrol Base, which was another COP. And Turkey Patrol Base was where I was in the battle at Samud, where I got blown up the first time in my MRAP, and now I have, brain damage. I got jarred pretty good. I thought I was dead when I came to. I thought I was dead. There was fire in the vehicle and smoke, and, I really did. I thought I was dead. I was sitting where I had just been standing on the gunner's stand. When I came to, I felt my legs. It was the first thing I did. I felt my legs to make sure they were there. I had to, it was like automatic. I just felt my legs. I was like, man, because I didn't know what happened right away. I thought I died and went to hell. And then I heard someone yell fire, so I felt my legs, because it was the truck commander. He yelled fire. So, I felt my legs. I got up. I climbed up out of the gunner's hatch. I grabbed my rifle. And everything was on fire. I ran to the front because it was automatic, because they train you in fire drills to actually go up and down the front if you're the gunner. That's one of the ways you're supposed to get out if there's a fire in the vehicle. Well, I ran to the front and flames were leaping up. The whole engine block's going. It's all blown off because we ran over triple stacked anti-tank mines, which means one on another, on another, on another. And then there was a white phosphorus mortar on top of it. So it blew the entire engine block off, lit it on fire because of the white phosphorus from that mortar. And then, it just burned everything up. So I had to jump off the back, and I was scared I was going to break my wrists or something jumping down, but it was moon dust, so it kind of broke my fall because I'm wearing all this heavy gear, right? I thought I was going to, break my wrists or my arms or something jumping off. But I threw my rifle down and jumped off. I was all right. The moon dust sort of broke my fall, and then I ran to a berm to take cover. There was a berm alongside the road because I had just, fired at the village to return fire because we were being shot at. So I returned fire. It was a crazy thing. I guess I got whoever was shooting at us, or they fled. I don't know what happened, but we didn't take any more fire. But I returned fire with my saw, my machine gun. And it was it was intense. It was intense. That was an intense little battle for me. And when they came and evacuated us, they sent in Apache gunships after that. My sergeant first class told me that after we got medevaced, they sent in Apache gunships and they rocketed the place. So I guess it's not even there anymore. But that was like a two-stage battle. First it was me on the machine gun, and then it was because they had already blown up the other three vehicles. They ran over mines and things, and I was the one to return fire before I got blown up. And they did shoot at me. I heard two zing by my head. So there were people taking pot shots, sharp shooting or whatever. And I guess I took them out, and maybe some others too. But I returned fire, and it was pretty wild. It was wild. I don't talk about that a lot, but hell, why not? It's good to talk about those things sometimes. It's good to let it out. Good to let it out. Like I said, I didn't have nothing planned tonight. I'm just talking. Well, does anybody have anything they want to say? Because basically, I did this so that I could talk about the comparisons between what's going on in real life versus what's actually going on in the scenario I made, and how close together they really are, as far as the things happening here. You have a lot going on, like with the Mexican situation and how I made La Raza. They were modeled off of the things going on in Mexico right now that I shared in the community tab. I'll leave it up for a little while before I rotate and take that down and put something else up. But yeah, that's really eerily similar to what I made there with them. And so is the 260,000 they're trying to get rid of. That's eerily similar to them, And then there's no telling what other groups are there. You already have a Texas secessionist movement too. So there's already a Texas secessionist movement, and you already got Florida looking like they sort of want to do their own thing too. So that's why I made Texas and Florida in this scenario like they were, because you already have the prerequisites for such a thing in real life. You already got that, So basically, that I made it as much like, real life as I could, So yeah, I see people are getting off. Well, I guess I'll keep talking whether people are here or not, because there's still a lot to talk about as far as this is concerned. I'm just sort of nerding out tonight. I'm just nerding out. But yeah, as far as the invasion though, that's a whole separate thing. Like when I made the invasion, it was on a different timeline, with the invasion documentary. In the invasion documentary, we didn't even have an internal conflict. It went straight to an invasion. It was like we just had minor economic troubles, and then an invasion happened. But in real life, this is likely going to happen first. Just like in prophecy, and it's already set up to happen like that. Anyway, it's looking a lot like the scenario I made. Then we'll be invaded, because the CCP properties that are throughout the country, they're not going to be messed with in any sort of internal issues. They're not, because you got to think, if the country's already ripping itself to pieces, who's really going to be able to do anything about those properties? If anybody goes near them, the Chi-Coms or their allies are going to, handle that. So, it's looking like it's going to be this first, then we get invaded, and you're gonna have scenes like this, like up in the mountains, in the mountain battles that occurred, and not just the audiobook story, but also in the Pacific Northwest campaign. You had all that going on. So you got your partisans, you got them right there trying to fire back at the Chi-Coms down there. Yeah, I put a lot of detail into this. Says I got 0 people in here. Well, that's cool. That's all right. I don't care. If other people don't care, I don't care. But anyway, you got all this going on. So, yeah, I'm going to be off YouTube soon. I'm just getting tired of all the BS going on YouTube. It's late. I'm speaking my mind here. Like I said, I didn't have much planned. Then you got your artillery here. This is rocket artillery. The Chi-Com rocket artillery, I should say. This was during the Northwest campaign also, where they pulled into position to, this is when they were trying to hit the Yakima area there. They're firing off. But then in the invasion, when the invasion happened, you had large battles like Richmond right here going on. Now these battles were a lot bigger than the battles in the internal conflict were. Generally speaking, they were pretty big. You had a large portion of the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army right here. You had a large portion of them in this area, and you had Chi-Com air support right there, this was a squadron of J-20 stealth fighters that were retasked for ground attack missions because there were no air targets, because the American Air Force had mostly been neutralized on the first day. But you had huge battles like this that went on. So you had these being, these circles being, civilian elements, and then you had the small triangle being mixed military, because in a situation like this, where there's no communications, because the very first thing they did in the invasion was they used their FK-2000s, which were anti-satellite missiles, and they also used their S-500s. The Russians had the S-500s, the Chinese had the FK-2000s. They used those to swat down the satellites, and after that, what happened was they had done a cyber attack in tandem with the anti-satellite weapon attacks, and that's what shut everything down across the land and made it very near impossible to coordinate. So when you're listening to the audiobook or whether you're reading the stories that I typed out in the community tab, the reason for them being so disorganized, the Americans, is because they had no way to communicate. They had no communications. They had no anything. Their computer systems were compromised and totally shut down. The grid was totally compromised and completely shut down. And any redundant systems that survived that were shut down by the Chinese and Russian electronic warfare systems, like the Russian Kirkuk system or the Murmansk system and the Chinese systems. You know, they have their own systems too, like what they used in the Pacific to neutralize the F-35s that flew within range of it. They made it nearly impossible for them to fly, and they almost crashed into the sea. They had to fly back out of the the electronic field before they crashed. So they would have been using. Damn, shut down again. I guess flashback when I was thinking about Iraq, I was thinking about one of the situations I experienced in Iraq as far as a combat situation, and I sort of like had a little flashback on camera. I didn't mean to, but it's good to let some of that out sometimes, talk about those things. But yeah, I was discussing this topic right here. I was discussing the conflict of the invasion as far as like, how that's going to go and look, compared to the internal conflict. Because you have situations like this, like you had the battle at Richmond and Petersburg. It's hard to see because the lighting's and my phone's crap, but I'm doing my best here. Where you had all these situations occur because they didn't have good comms or coordination. They didn't have good communications or coordination. So that made for situations like, units broke down, discipline broke down, units scattered because with the Russian and Chinese anti-satellite weapons downing their eyes and ears and the cyber attack taking down the computer networks and the grid and everything, there was no communications. And then the electronic warfare interfered with radio traffic. I mean, what could they do? Only they really could only do things as far as like if they were within earshot or within, enough range where they could send a runner. Yeah, you're good, Mary. I'm here. Oh man, died again. Ugh. Hey y'all, I'm sorry. This thing keeps dying on me. It keeps dying on me. It's really, really low on battery. I'm gonna have to end this. I might continue this another time and go back into talking about the invasion. There's a lot I wanted to say about that, but I guess I'm gonna have to stop it here. I love all y'all. Thanks for coming. Y'all be blessed.